Hey everyone, it's Don. I've traveled to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, 20 miles from where I grew up, to trace the path of the great Johnstown flood of 1889. So let's go. Our path today will start at South Fork, where the South Fork Dam existed, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, where an earthen dam broke on May 31st, 1889, and traveled down river, smashing into Johnstown, killing 2,208 people when it was all said and done. Before we head up to South Fork, I'm pausing here to set the stage for you, partly because I lost my first episode, my first segment, when I visited. So Johnstown is a small city in south-central, southwestern Pennsylvania. It's situated in the Appalachian Mountains, just off of Laurel Ridge, one of the highest ridges in the state. And I did an episode on hiking the Conemaugh River Gap a couple of years ago, which is one of the deepest river gorges in the whole eastern United States. Nonetheless, Johnstown, the city, was founded around 1800, and it was situated in coal country, Pennsylvania. And that coal fed the steel industry and various, offshoots of that. So Johnstown was a small steel mill city filled with, immigrant laborers from Eastern Europe primarily, and Southern Europe. But through the mid-1800s, late 1800s, it was a burgeoning city. The valley, it was situated in a valley with two small rivers, the Little Conemaugh and Stony Creek, which will become very important soon, was basically filled with industry, bustling, probably was polluted as all heck, smoggy, but nonetheless, it was flourishing at that time. So it was also connected to transportation routes via canals, and railroads were just getting put in, but initially there were canal systems that linked Johnstown to other points of commerce. And starting in the late 1830s, around 1839 I believe, the South Fork Dam was built on the South Fork of the Little Conemaugh River, 14 miles upstream of Johnstown. Now, this dam was originally built to impound water to feed a canal system. It was an earthen dam. It was built over a period of about 20 years because of various delays that happened in its construction. And essentially, by the time it was built and ready to go, the canals were basically being abandoned as a major transportation route in favor of railroads, which were now being put in to take the place of things like canals. So this lake was built initially to serve a canal system, but it essentially never functioned in that way. So by 1850, late 1850s, when it was completed, it hardly got used, and it kind of went unused, abandoned for 10 to 20 years until a group of industrialists, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, bought the property, bought the lake, bought the dam and the property to develop basically a private fishing and hunting resort. And members of this club, who were the one percenters at the time, were people like Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Carnegie, Mellon. So these were the Pittsburgh Rust Belt industrialists, not Rust Belt at the time, Steel Belt industrialists, who saw this as used this as a private retreat to fish and camp and picnic and so forth, and boat. All right, so the South Fork Dam, which was an earthen dam, backed up Lake Conemaugh, which stretched about 2 miles upstream along the Little Conemaugh. Okay, and again, this is perched up high, about 14 miles upriver of Johnstown. Now, on the fateful day of May 31st, 1889, there had been, serious rains occurring for the last day or two. Estimates were up to 6 to 10 inches of rain fell due to a major storm, which caused all the rivers feeding Johnstown to rise, the Stony Creek, Little Conemaugh, and so forth, but really was threatening at South Fork because Lake Conemaugh was threatening to overtop this earthen dam, which was basically in ill repair at the time. So there's a major criticism here, is this was a preventable disaster if this dam had been maintained properly. In fact, the Fishing and Hunting Club had lowered the level of the earthen dam a little bit by 3 feet or so in order to widen it so they could drive across it. Okay, so they in the course of their activities had lowered this dam at one point, lowered the crest of the dam. The spillway, which we won't be able to see in this episode, but it was also pretty small and inadequate to really relieve pressure off of this dam at major flood stage waters. So it had an inadequate spillway. The dam breast had been lowered a little bit, and some other things were put in, like screens to prevent fish from being lost by the lake that ended up blocking outflow. Things like that were all foibles that could have been avoided. But nonetheless, this major storm, May 31st, 1889, caused the lake levels to rise to threaten the dam. And, it became imminent at one point. There were some efforts underway to try to raise the breast of the dam. But ultimately, that dam failed. Okay, once you get a river or water going over top an earthen dam, it's lights out. Okay, so that started to happen. I believe it was somewhere around 11 o'clock in the morning, or noon, roughly. Okay, and it was suggested that the water cut through the earthen dam and drained the entire lake, which again stretched about 2 miles upstream, within about an hour. Okay, the whole thing was drained within an hour. Okay, and it flooded the Little Conemaugh River Valley and headed downstream, and estimates were made that it reached the velocity of the Mississippi River at the delta at one point. So this giant wall of water crashed downriver and headed toward Johnstown, and we're going to pick up in a bit the first spotted hit after it left South Fork. Okay, but the next segment you'll see now is I'll be standing at the southern side of the dam breast. Okay, and you'll see the breached dam in front of me, the Little Conemaugh River flowing in between. And there's currently a railroad that actually runs right through the breached dam along the river. And so let's pick it up from there, from the south breast of the South Fork Dam. I'm now on the south side of the dam, looking across at where I started, the north side. Just a couple other little things, again with the lake out in front. There were efforts to try to save this dam when this disaster was imminent. For example, there was a group of Italian immigrants actually here that were hired by the club to, I think, put in a sewer system. And they were out here, they were working frantically to try to raise the level of the dam. I mean, among other efforts that were tried, one thing was, I think people tried to dig a smaller spillway on this side of the dam to relieve some of the floodwaters. But also they tried to raise the center of the dam with rocks and mud and dirt and hay and anything they could get a hold of. But, that ultimately failed when it was a lost cause. So in any case, if you were to visit here, you can take a walk that will take you down through the breached dam itself along the Little Conemaugh and pretend you're floodwaters. But what I plan to do now is go downriver and look at a couple other key points during the whole saga of the Great Johnstown Flood of 1889. This is a little view from the car of the lake bed. This would have been Lake Conemaugh. the town of St. Michael just in the distance there. And this probably will not show on the video, but on the ridge top in the background is a whole set of windmills. I don't know exactly when those were all established. I don't remember them as a kid growing up in this area, but there's quite a few windmills up there right now. But that would be the bulk of the Lake Conemaugh out there, and where I'm located is sort of where the cabins and cottages would have been set for the club. Okay, my next stop now is Mineral Point. Here I'm in the town of Mineral Point. This is a few miles downstream of the South Fork Dam, and this spot was critical because as the floodwaters left the dam, they rushed downriver, and they were initially trapped by the Conemaugh Viaduct, a railroad bridge that was built across the Little Conemaugh River. And so that temporarily created another dam that then subsequently burst as well. So it was like a secondary dam burst during the whole process. And so the floodwater swept through this area behind me, and this town was only of about 30 houses at the time. It was pretty much destroyed, and 16 people were killed in this town in that. Here's the river in front of me. But then, you know, from here, the floodwaters were unleashed to downtown Johnstown, where we'll head next. I'm at the point in Johnstown where the Little Conemaugh River meets the Stony Creek. So let's take a look at where I am. So first, this is the Little Conemaugh. This is where the floodwaters would have been rushing down from upstream, starting at South Fork. And at this point, these sorts of structures weren't here. That wall of water would have crashed against the hillside you see to my left, and basically started to back up into the valley. This is Stony Creek. Okay, and these two rivers join right here at this point to form the Conemaugh River, which proceeds downstream to meet the Allegheny River and head toward Pittsburgh. The bridge you see in front of me is the famous Stone Bridge. It's a railroad bridge, and it actually survived the floodwaters. It survived this giant wall of water, but it once again served as another dam. And debris, barbed wire, there were wire plants here, houses, buildings, and everything collected against that bridge and backed up a massive wall of water, another dam, that flooded the city of Johnstown proper upstream. Now, it was raining, this is floodwaters, but ironically, all those debris and oil spills and coal in this area led to massive fires at this site, which contributed to further death and destruction of people and animals that were caught in this debris. So a lot of people in this disaster were killed by the floodwaters directly, drowned, but a lot of people unfortunately were also killed by being burnt by fire at this site. Okay, so this whole area, imagine it completely underwater. That's downtown Johnstown in the sun's direction here, just buried by water, massive fires. Somehow that bridge survived it and is still standing. It's been refurbished, of course, in time, but this was where it all culminated, leading to the deaths of 2,208 people. Over to the right are remnants of steel mill, the steel history of Johnstown. As I stated, this is coal country, and that coal fed steel making, and later it fed electric generating plants in various counties around here. But this is the site of one of the largest natural disasters in U.S. history. A couple of things to point out here too are all the efforts they made to protect against floods. As you can see, there are flood walls that were line these small rivers. Were all put in after that time to try to contain the water within these channels. But the rivers themselves have been restored quite a bit. You know, all these rivers around here suffered from acid mine drainage, and but there are a lot of efforts been made upstream of both of these rivers to help clean up this water. And although you can still see remnants of the sulfur and iron, the orangish color in the riverbed, there is actually fish in these rivers now. When I was a kid, that was unheard of, but people actually fish right here and can catch fish in Johnstown. And that was just not possible when I was a kid. So kudos to that. Right near this spot is the famous Point Stadium. This is a baseball and football field, and I've had the pleasure to play a football game in there one time. Let's see if we can peek through the gates here. There you go. That's about all we can get today, but this thing has been fixed up. It's in nice shape, I see. There's also a hockey stadium and basketball stadium where I also played basketball, called the Johnstown War Memorial in this town. But back to flood history, if you go a little bit upstream of where I am, of Point Stadium here, there's the Johnstown Flood Museum, which I'd recommend if you visit this area. It really lays out with a lot of imagery and video and such. It's in this direction. A lot of the history of the events that led up to the flood and the aftermath. Okay, now we're going to head up to Westmont on top of the ridge, talk about some things up there. Behind me is probably one of the most famous views in this part of Pennsylvania. We are viewing downtown Johnstown from the top of the inclined plane in Westmont. So this is the downtown part of Johnstown, PA. The Little Conemaugh River that we've been tracing comes down the mountain through that valley. Then the Stony Creek goes up in this direction. We started our journey today at South Fork, that is over the ridges there, 14 miles upstream of where we're located right now. And of course the floodwaters rushed down the Little Conemaugh River, crashed into the hillside that we're looking at here now, just below Point Stadium, which you can see now in the center of our view, the baseball football field, and then led to a great backup of water into the city of Johnstown. As I drove through the city, you could see markers on the buildings where the floodwaters reached 10 or 15 feet up the buildings, and it was indicated. So just imagine a massive lake out here. Of course, you can see the old steel mills, a couple of them up in that direction along the Little Conemaugh, another down river a little bit. They're basically all closed at this point. That industry is largely non-existent here anymore. Okay, but this is the top of the inclined plane. So what's the inclined plane? Well, as a result of the Johnstown flood, this building, or this structure, was built, okay, in order to transport people from the valley floor up to a new community that was built in response to the flood called Westmont. So we're on the western side of the city, we're up on the mountain, so this is Westmont. And the inclined plane is a funicular, and this is the steepest automotive carrying funicular, I think, in the world, at least in the nation. All right, so the carriages are currently parked partway down the plane because this is being renovated. Okay, it's undergoing testing at something like a $17 million renovation project here that's been underway. They're in a testing phase right now. So I think it's due to open sometime later this fall. I've ridden on that thing many times, and so this is the famous Johnstown inclined plane, currently out of service. All right, so This is Johnstown, PA, the site of the Great Johnstown Flood. There were subsequent floods. Despite all the efforts that were made to shore up these small rivers and, you know, not have these weak dams upstream and so forth, there was another flood in 1936 and one that I remember in 1977. So I grew up 20 miles away from here, and the flood of 1977 was pretty devastating too. I don't know how many people it killed, but it affected things in my hometown of Homer City, Pennsylvania quite a bit. So I remember that one. Okay, while I'm here in Westmont, I'm gonna go visit one more spot that is famous for trees. I gotta get some trees in today, so let's go see that.
After I was done, he handed me a wet towel. Or some kind of, if I worked there, I guess. Yeah, it's a beautiful view from up there. Yeah, I can't remember. I'll have to get out there one of these days. I like this. This is really nice.
I'm now standing on Luzerne Street in Westmont, which is famous for its American elms that line the street. In fact, this street is known as the longest municipally maintained series of American elms in the nation. So let's just take a walk and take a look at some of these trees. So Westmont, again, as a community, was built after the Great Flood of Johnstown. And so this street would have been a few years younger than the flood itself. And the oldest American elms that would be on this street would be approximately 130 or so years old. And so most of what we're looking at are American elms of different sizes. These, like this, are very likely originals. Okay. So I see several larger trees that would essentially be originals. If we take a look here, you can see that they are monitored and tagged. But there are also lots of smaller trees as well, okay, because have only been able to maintain these trees through treatment for Dutch elm disease. I almost said emerald ash borer. But this is what a famous elm street would look like. Elms are famous for their vase-shaped appearance. Okay, you can really see that in the trees ahead of me. And but unfortunately, most of them went by the wayside due to Dutch elm disease. And the only way you have a street like this is by treating those trees. So interestingly, after elms were largely destroyed by Dutch elm disease, trees like ashes were put in their place. And silver maples is another. Silver maples in particular, because you could prune them into this vase shape. They kind of also adopt this sort of shape naturally. And so, but here they are now 50, 60 years later, 70 years later, and silver maples are falling apart and people get mad at them, and they're now being cut down all over where I live now in Ohio. Okay, but these are some really nice elms that have been kept in pretty good shape through treatment, but you can see there is some dieback on some, and they have had to cut down or replace some of them. Okay, so this is Luzerne Street in Westmont, PA. As you walk here, you can get the tree tunnel effect as well. So I think the street itself is supposed to be 3,200 feet long, which makes it the longest stretch of American elms lining a street, left remaining in the U.S. Okay. The tree behind me is the largest elm I've found along Luzerne Street. So it's right across from the Westmont Presbyterian Church, and it has this big root flare, and it seems to be the largest diameter elm that I can see. It splits about 10 feet up there. Still in good health. That seems to be the king of the street. I noticed too, by the way, there's one oak. That's the only non-elm I've seen on the whole street, the tree that has most of the leaves on it right there. From here, I think it's just a northern red oak. But it's the only non-elm I can see on the street, which is kind of interesting. But that's Luzerne Street. Beautiful. Nice day to be here.